Nintendo's latest venture into the Legend of Zelda franchise, Breath of the Wild, is considered to be a complete masterpiece, with perfect scores all across the board. And who can fucking blame them? You have a giant open world, polished and with things to actually do in any way the player chooses. There is so much to sink your teeth into, and will leave you playing for hours upon hours. And for once, at least in a 3D installment, Nintendo weren't afraid to break the conventions that has plagued the series for so long, and go back to the roots that started Zelda in the first place and made it so great. But to simply regard it a 10 out of 10, no questions asked, not weighing in the negatives, is absolutely ridiculous. I find it understandable, however, as I was completely blown away on my first playthrough as well. And I do think that, as it stands, this is one of the closest things to a perfect game that we currently have. But if Nintendo is willing to continue in this direction, it's important that they're aware of their shortcomings and doesn't succumb to the notion that they did nothing wrong. So, enough beating around the bush. Let me explain to you why I think Breath of the Wild isn't a masterpiece. The beginning of this game, the tutorial or whatever you want to call it, is brilliantly executed. The Great Plateau teaches you everything you need to know before delving into the rest of the world, and with very little information dumps and hand-holding. It gives you the sense that you're just playing the game instead of being forced to learn it. But to narrow it down, and looking away from the smaller details, this is what this area actually tells you. Look for shrines and follow the story. Those are the two most prevalent things, and ends up being the main aspect of the outside world, with 120 shrines to find and complete, and the main story looming around from every corner. This is why the player feels like there is so much to do at any given time. But before I get back to that, you also have the abundance of enemy camps, wildlife, stables and towns, boss-like enemies, side quests, great fairy fountains, Sheikah towers, memories, 900 Korok seeds, and the occasional rarities like Kilton's monster shop and shooting stars. What we end up with, as stated, is a world with a lot of things to do at all times. But they are all the same. There isn't much difference between any of these interesting ideas, and it makes the world feel 3 or 4 times bigger than it needs to be. But that is an important note. One of my best experiences from this game comes from just wandering around, traveling over mountains, taking a raft and sailing along a river, watching the divine beasts and dragons from the distance. Every travel feels like a new adventure and has a unique story to it that the player experiences for him or herself. And I never really expected to find anything grand, as I was just on my way to one of the main quest areas, or something I had marked on my map that looked interesting from afar. But it's the journey you look back at, not the destination. And they nailed the feel for it 100%. There is no need for shrines to fill in the gaps. They just take up unnecessary space and ruins the creative ideas that could have inhabited the world instead. So let me get into rant mode and talk about the goddamn shrines. I despise these things. Their biggest flaw isn't only the sheer amount, but their inability to get actually interesting. This is the result of an open world, as it's entirely up to the player what order to do the shrines in, which is why any one shrine can't reuse new mechanics and concepts and expand upon them, since the player would most likely have missed out learning it in the first place. And their small size prevents them from taking an idea far enough to actually get challenging. And fuck the golf shrine, it's dumb! Gee, I'm so glad I have the option to play without motion controls. Too bad like 5 shrines requires it though. Can't turn that off. If you think shit's already stupid, then brace yourself for this. There are 20 fucking tests of strength. I mean, give me a freaking break. And for God's sake, looking at what is essentially the exact same areas and listening to that shrine theme over and over and over and over and over and over is driving me crazy! And there is absolutely no mystery. You go down the fucking elevator and you say to yourself, puzzle, chest, and spirit orb. And that's it! Breath of the Wild! A Zelda that breaks all the formulas. Meanwhile, it creates just as many new ones itself. There's one aspect I still haven't talked about, however, and that is the shrine quests. And this is exactly the direction they should have gone with in the first place. Having riddles and puzzles to solve out in the open world is both fun and engaging, and opens so many world-building possibilities. It also makes much better usage of empty areas. But they're still shrine quests! So you know exactly what you're getting yourself into and what the outcome will be. A piece of shit shrine popping up from the ground for you to enter, just to receive a spirit orb! Why is this a big deal? This shit! Think about it. The only time you ever spend time loading in this game is when you start it up, which is to be expected. When you respawn after dying, which makes for a good penalty. And fast traveling, which compared to the time you would spend walking, isn't a big deal at all. But these unholy underground chambers of fuck requires extensive loading times, both going in and out, and completely interrupts the flow of this game. My point is, the shrines are garbage and I don't like them. Alright, enough complaining for now. Let me instead provide you all with alternative solutions they could have implemented for the game instead. The first thing we need to ask ourselves is, what exactly is the goal of the shrines? Well, to acquire spirit orbs. And the spirit orbs act as one of the few ways of progressing your character, as you spend 4 at a time to either increase your maximum health or stamina wheel. This is a great system, as it gives the player a choice that will vastly affect his or her gameplay experience. Going for more hearts is a lot safer, but you're stuck with less movement and climbing opportunities. Going for the wheel, however, will grant a lot more freedom in exploration, at the cost of being vulnerable to damage. This balance is fantastic, and plays an enormous part in the meta of this game. So why on earth is such an important resource only distributed throughout the fucking shrines? If your answer is to keep track on the total count of spirit orbs, then let me point out that you'll never be able to max out both stamina and hearts simultaneously, which is why they don't have a need for a streamlined system. They could have been rewards for just about anything out in the world. Difficult to discover chests, extra powerful world bosses, upgraded enemy bases, side missions, anything. The shrines could instead have been combined optional dungeons, each with their own themes and difficulties. And by the way, it's not like they couldn't find any other way to scatter fast travel locations all across the map, so don't even get me started. I mentioned the shrine quests earlier as they're great examples, just without the shrine appearing afterwards, of ways to distribute spirit orbs, while still using the outside world. Just remove the name Shrine Quest, and the player will think he or she is just experiencing something new, and have no idea what reward is in store. The tunic you get from completing all shrines could easily have been given by something else, so it's pretty clear that this game would have worked out just fine without them. Let me get back to my idea of having optional dungeons. Now, I think we can all agree that the 4 dungeons in this game is pretty underwhelming. More on that later, however, but let's just say 4 main quest dungeons is fine, if the world provided you with more optional ones. Not divine beasts, but actual dungeons. A cave, ruins, mansion, pirate ship, ice cavern, just anything. Take HYRULE Castle as an example. One of my favorite locations in this entire game, as it isn't treated simply as a last dungeon, but an open area you can enter whenever you want, from wherever you want. You can wander around, collect rare items and materials, find Zelda's diary, and even complete quests. Or you can just fight Calamity Ganon. Why aren't there more areas like this? Yiga Hideout could have done this, but ended up being a short, Gerudo-style infiltration game, which is a tradition, but shattered the potential of this clan. I mean, sure, this boss fight is one of the silliest and funny parts of the game, but at the cost of taking anything regarding Yiga seriously. And yes, I know, it was already silly with the whole banana obsession thing, but you know what? I'm distracting myself here. My point is, Hyrule Castle is genius, and there should have been more areas like it in some forms. Let's talk about the enemies, and to put it straight, there should have been more of them. Simply having 4 difficulty types of Bokoblins, Lyssalfos, Moblins, Hinoxes, and Lynels isn't enough. It doesn't take long until you've discovered all of them and end up having the same fights again and again. After fighting your 3rd Stone Talus, you pretty much got them figured out and won't have a lot of problem dealing with them from that point on. I mean, these mini-bosses, or whatever you want to call them, are all over the place. This most likely follows the principle of the Korok seats and shrines. Since the world is gigantic and the player decides where to go, they're placed around in a way that no matter where you go, you'll end up fighting them. It's as if the developers were scared that you would miss them and their hard work would go to waste. But that is the entire point of an open world. Everyone isn't supposed to have the exact same experience. Another problem is that since they're all over the world, the different regions feels less significant. Much like there are certain plants you'll only find in cold areas, there should have been region-specific enemies, like the Moldugas that exclusively appear in the Gerudo Desert. This probably seems like asking too much from a game with content this vast, but in order to truly become a masterpiece, these are the kinds of features that must be demanded. The current cast of enemies, however, are very fleshed out, seem very alive, and is a joy to battle against. But the AI still leaves a bit to be desired. Take the Guardians as an example. Looking back at the first teaser, they were portrayed as highly mobile, powerful death machines that Link has to flee until cornered and call for desperate measures. This was the kind of interaction I wanted, and in some cases this is true. Your heart will drop on the floor the first couple of times you see these roaming around, spotting you and running towards you at high speeds. But lo and behold, all you gotta do is stand still, wait for the shot, reflect it back and instantly kill it. While this move is very risky and requires some practice and skill, as soon as you have mastered it, the Guardian sucks ass. Why doesn't he use his fucking legs and circle around you, avoiding the reflected shot? This would give you a better reason to use your arrows or immobilize him. It would also heavily incentivize you to use a horse, something I completely neglected once I figured out how fucking easy they are. Just look at the Hinox. Once he understands that you're aiming for his eye, he covers it with his hand. Every enemy should have had the same level of detail and ability to learn from the player's behavior. The Bokoblins will chase you and attack with melee weapons, but if you're out of reach, they will start throwing rocks at you. However, if you stay at ground level and continue running around, they will just follow you until they get near enough to attack. After realizing that they simply can't keep up, they should have had a different way of approaching you. Moblins tend to pick up Bokoblins and throw them, but besides that, their behavior doesn't change much. Still, what we have is a very enjoyable AI. I'm just saying that there is always room for improvement. And this is unrelated, but why doesn't the Lynels have their own battle music and a life meter like all the other mini-bosses? Whatever. Speaking of music, Breath of the Wild has a lot to offer in its 4-hour soundtrack. Although you have your typical fairy fountain, there's hardly any tracks from earlier games. Very few are alterations, like Rito Village covering Dragon Roost Island, but besides that, there's a ton of great original tunes. Anything that plays around the main storyline is fantastic. The villages are peaceful and welcoming, the battles are exciting, and the theme for Hyrule Castle is so freaking badass and amazing. I just have to say it. It's my absolute favorite track in this entire game, and probably one of my favorites throughout the entire series. But I wouldn't talk about all this if something weren't wrong. So, what's the problem? The sounds and music used for the world exploration is just boring. Don't get me wrong, it's very deliberate, as it gives the sense of wilderness and how open the world really is. And since you're going to spend so much time walking around these gigantic landscapes, having the traditional upbeat overworld soundtracks would probably exhaust you and get very repetitive. But they did nothing to strike a compromise. There are certain differences considering what type of area you're currently in, like somewhere snowy, in the mountains, whether it's day or night, on your horse, And you know what? While I actually do like these calm little piano tunes, I'm riding a fucking horse on my way to new adventures. Where's the epic traveling music? I never got tired of the Great Sea. It made me sailing from island to island feel that much more special. I talked about the enemies earlier and how they should have been unique to different locations. The same applies for the soundtrack. I want a song that just screams Tabantha Frontier. I want to enter AKKALA for the first time and hear something new that reflects this region I've never been to. I ended up listening to a playlist I made for myself on my computer and would pick the one that fit my location or situation the most. And that's kinda sad actually. But that was my 2 cents on the soundtrack, so let's move on. There are 2 kinds of people that play Breath of the Wild. Those with amiibos and those without. If you have a lot of amiibos, you will get to experience exclusive pieces of content. Not a lot, mind you, but there is nothing like Wolflink in the vanilla game. And for any fan of the earlier games, looking like Fair's DT or using the Sword of Six Sages is enough to invoke a massive nostalgia boner. In any case, it's a selection of content that those without won't get to enjoy. And I see it both ways. The cost of one amiibo is way too much for just a mask, some materials, breakable weapons or a horse. On the other side, it rewards those that already have invested in amiibos, hoping that they would find a proper use at some point, or just collectors in general. But I cannot stand the fact that just because I don't want to spend a fortune on dumb figures, I can't access items, a superior horse, and a fucking companion. It's basically microtransactions, but even worse, because instead of simply paying for the service in an in-game store, I have to get my hands on a physical, limited resource. Something that could take me weeks to get my hands on. Case in point, the amiibos are fucking stupid. Next up, the main quest. Now, unlike most people, I don't really care about story in games. Well, actually, I just don't care if the story is good or not, or how much depth there is to it. As long as it fits a game and doesn't need to be a movie, I'm okay with it. With that said, the story is as Zelda as you can possibly get. And whatever, I didn't really expect anything else, to be honest. But why does it have to be so generic and ridden with formula? And what's the point of starting 100 years in the future when the mystery regarding what happened ends as soon as King Boat Guy reveals himself? Finding and watching the memories just leaves me asking, why couldn't I be there to experience it myself? You know, since I'm playing a motherfucking game, I just don't care about the calamity that has befallen this world, because you as the player never get to experience how tragic it all was. The world looks beautiful, and every village is full of life and seems just fine. So what's the big fuss about? And what the hell is Ganon even doing? He had 100 years free from Link, the champions, or any threat, yet the only thing he has full control over is Hyrule Castle? And Zelda, you can give her as many cute cutscenes as humanly possible, but it won't change the fact that we never meet her in person until the end of the game. So I have absolutely no attachment to her whatsoever. And the champions, just fuck all of them, really. I mean, Mipha is adorable, Urbosa is badass, Daruk is a Goron, and Revali is a fucking cunt. But backstory and cinematics won't make me like them as characters in a game. Moving away from the story structure, let's talk more about the formula. Besides the Sheikah Slate storyline, you do the exact same thing 4 times. Head towards a divine beast, find village of a specific race, watch dumb divine beast make you aware of their presence, even though you basically have been watching them from a distance this entire time, which built up excitement and became your own moment, but falls short when the game flat out tells you, "This is important! Make sure to look at it! You're supposed to do this!" You then seek out someone important who wants you to do something for them, which will favor both you and the race. Team up with a representative, battle Divine Beast, enter Divine Beast, listen to the spirit of the champion tell you to activate terminals every freaking time! You control parts of the beast to solve puzzles and access different parts, fight something blight Ganon, have a chat with dead champion, acquire an ability from them, watch the beast get into position and shoot laser beam at Hyrule Castle. You might think, the
That's not any different from previous Zelda games. I mean, you go to a location, find a dungeon, get an item, fight boss with item, and repeat.
Yes, on paper, that is correct. But the individual difference is enormous. Example time! Wind Waker, you gotta get these 3 orbs. First 2 you get after beating dungeons. Third you just get. You're like, where's the dungeon? You use the 3 orbs, bam! Here's your dungeon. And just like that, it's different. And okay, I admit, the Divine Beasts and the journey leading up to them isn't exactly the same every time. But none of them feel truly unique. And it's just stupid how after spending like 5 minutes in Rito Village, you seek out whatever bird face, talk a little, do the easiest minigame of all time, then he just gives you a free ride up to Ba Meadow. And while this looks cool, and it's quite fun to freefall and glide as much as you want, there's no challenge whatsoever. Then you enter, complete the dungeon, and you're done. You spent so little time with this fucking burb that it's utterly ridiculous that they gave him an important introduction, with a splash text showing his name and voice lines. And that's also my problem with the Divine Beasts. Just how little effort you put in and how linear it is. There is only one way to defeat and enter them. Where's the freedom in that? When I first saw this flying titan, all sorts of ideas popped up in my head and got me thinking like crazy just how I would interact with it. And they just went with the most lazy solution possible. Junobu is a goddamn nightmare, and that's all I want to say regarding Rudania. Vah Ruta and Prince Sidon will always have a special place in my heart, as it was my very first. And I'd strongly argue for that this was the best Divine Beast quest, no doubt. Sidon is likable, and he doesn't just sit on a goddamn throne, he doesn't get trapped inside a cave, and isn't a lone fucking loser. There's also a bond between you, as he shows you the way to Zora's domain, and he stands up for you when this old racist fish refuses to help you. Not that you even need his help, what? But nonetheless, it feels great fighting Ruta alongside Sidon. The Ganon bosses, however, sucks! Using them as mini-bosses would have been much more appropriate, and instead use new original bosses to end the dungeon. Alright, only one more. Vana Boris and Yiga Clan hideout aside, Gerudo Town is just a load of monkey shit. These Gerudos are complete morons. You recover their precious fucking heirloom, defeating the enemy leader at the same time, and save their town and the desert from Naboris. And you're still not allowed inside the village unless you're dressed as a woman? Okay, I get it. Even though Riju says like, Link is an exception, you guys. All the guards can't be sure if you're him or not. So, how about some ID? Like, I don't know, the Thunder Helmet maybe? But no! Saving their entire people and bringing the helmet back in the first place simply isn't enough. I mean, this breakable sword and shield should pretty much cover it already. Do a bunch more shit for us, however, and you get the helmet. Well, guess what? You still get kicked out wearing it! Wearing their fucking heirloom! And it doesn't seem like they're in any trouble at all. Naboris is just walking around in circles. As long as you don't approach him, you're fine. Why would you want to wander around the desert anyway? There's Moldugas out there, you goddamn Gerudos! But man, they're hot as fuck. That's pretty much my problems with the main quest. But it doesn't end just yet. While shit gets a little stupid here and there, nothing gets more disappointing than a god-awful last boss! Calamity Ganon, way too easy. Beast Ganon, way too fucking easy! This is the biggest joke to come out of a Zelda game. The absolute worst Ganon fight, period. He does one pathetic attack that is impossible to get hit by. You ride around on your horse out in the open Hyrule field, but what's the point? Ganon doesn't fucking move. It's just annoying to circle around him and shoot arrows at glowing targets. Then as you defeat him, Zelda just wrecks his shit. Like, how did you lose to begin with? Holy goddamn, this end is a travesty! Last thing I need to mention. Whoever collected all 900 Korok seeds, I'm so sorry. I genuinely feel bad for you. A fucking poop? A golden fucking turd. unbelievable. Anyway, Breath of the Wild is not flawless by any means. If this is your description of a masterpiece, then more power to you. I, however, cannot stand this many stupid design choices when they got so much right. Can't wait for the DLC though, I love this game to death. Like this video!